Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the RSIS webinar on doing more with less. HADR in the current era of AI, crisis and austerity. My name's Alistair Cook, and I will be moderating the session today. As we've seen, the humanitarian sector is facing pressure on multiple fronts. A little over a year ago, the US drastically cut its foreign aid and shut down USAID as the primary channel for US humanitarian and development aid. This reduction amounted to a massive drop from the 17 billion in global humanitarian assistance provided by the US in recent years to about only 2 billion. As a result, humanitarian actors are being expected to do more with less, or as some would say, do less with less, amid rising crisis needs, constrained financing, and rapid technological change all converging. This is accompanied by a broader contraction in global humanitarian funding. The UN's Global Humanitarian Overview in 2025 shows the results of this shock. So in October, only about 9.57 billion US dollars of the 45.34 billion required, or 21% of the requirements, to assist 181 million people out of 300. So we saw really a very small number being reached. Coinciding with such fiscal developments is the period of rapid technological change that we've seen by the accelerated adoption of artificial intelligence, AI, across all sectors, including in our own humanitarian and development space. The ICRC has noted in its humanitarian outlook that AI, along with drones and cyber operations, are rapidly transforming the conduct of hostilities in conflict zones. Humanitarian organizations and agencies are therefore confronted with difficult trade-offs between maintaining impact and sustaining operations, often resorting to contraction in personnel and geographic coverage, narrowing programs to a more limited set of activities, or even pressing forward despite these uncertainties. Against this backdrop, technological innovation can be viewed both as a lifeline and a liability. The digitalization of humanitarian response has allowed rapid and large-scale data collection without corresponding safeguards. It raises questions on accountability, consent, and transparency. At the same time, generative AI has increasingly become part of the information landscape in crisis-affected environments, introducing risks like model drift and inconsistent or biased outputs that can influence risk perception and trust. We have also seen in the wake of the Myanmar earthquake, the spread of mis and disinformation that impacted the humanitarian efforts. Within our broader region in the Asia Pacific, we have coordination mechanisms that seek to address some of these challenges, such as the Changi Regional Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Coordination Center, which plays an instrumental role in supporting HADR operations. The center facilitates information sharing, operational coordination, and civil military coordination among regional and international partners during major disasters, illustrating how coordination platforms can help the humanitarian sector manage crises despite the sector facing funding pressures and rapid technological change. So what we're planning to do today in the webinar, we aim to achieve an examination of how the humanitarian sector, broadly understood, can harness innovation effectively under these constraints of austerity. We also want to consider how to mitigate the governance, ethical, and operational risks that emerge from the widespread adoption of data-intensive and AI-enabled technologies in humanitarian affairs and disaster management. And then finally, we also want to be thinking about what doing more with less should mean in an era defined not only by resource scarcity, brought about by the global humanitarian funding shortage or decreasing amounts of money available, but also by the digital transformation that is being shaped by artificial intelligence amid the increasingly complex humanitarian disasters that we see being triggered by extreme weather events, conflicts, and climate change. So let me please introduce our speakers. Our first speaker will be Dr. Miguel Laverde, who is a senior geospatial scientist at the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, ADPC. He has over 15 years experience developing physical AI, early warning, and anticipatory action for climate-related systems, and he is currently working on artificial intelligence and data to support disaster management. A little bit more about his organization. The ADPC is a regional organization that leads several programs that enhance disaster resilience, climate adaptation, and risk management across Asia and the Pacific. In 2023, ADPC, USAID, and NASA jointly launched Severe Southeast Asia, an initiative to use Earth observation data and geospatial technology to address climate change. However, the project was affected by changing aid policies, but has survived to continue operations. We'll hear more from Miguel shortly about how his organization and those like APDC have navigated these funding constraints while continuing to advance technology and innovation. Our second speaker is Mr. Vincent Kessler. Vincent is the Chief Executive Officer of Synspective SG. He began his career at the Center for Remote Imaging Sensing and Processing, also known as CRISP, at Singapore's National University of Singapore, which focuses on national remote sensing and he has led business development for several global geospatial companies. At Synspective, Vincent focuses on expanding their footprint in SAR, satellite market, through partnerships in disaster management, environmental monitoring, and sustainability. We'll hear more from Vincent shortly about the role the private sector can play in humanitarian affairs and disaster management, particularly through satellite technology and data innovation. Our third speaker is Ms. Feye Andal, who is a geospatial professional and longtime volunteer with OpenStreetMap Philippines, where she's been active since 2013. She currently leads the Web GIS team at the University of the Philippines Resilience Institute, NOAA Center, overseeing the development of digital platforms that support disaster resilience and risk information systems. She previously served as the Asia Pacific Regional Ambassador for Youth Mappers from 2020 to 2024, and she was named among Geospatial World's 50 Rising Stars, and through awards such as the World Food Programme Prep Innovation Challenge in 2024 for the NOAA Impact-Based Flood Forecasting System, and was also awarded for her leadership in UPRI Youth Mappers. So Youth Mappers is a volunteer network where contributors participate in mapathons. The OpenStreetMap data produced are used to fill critical gaps in crisis zones to aid logistics and response. For example, in the Turkey-Syria earthquakes in 2023, the Youth Mappers mapped shelters, roads, and damage to aid the logistics operations to support the relief efforts. We'll hear more from Feye shortly about the role of youth and youth communities and volunteer networks, such as in open mapping, how they can continue to support humanitarian efforts, particularly in a time of constrained resources and growing global uncertainty. So without further ado, each of our speakers will have 15 minutes in order to share their presentations and views. We will then come back together. I'll have some questions, but please use the question and answer function in the webinar panel at the bottom. If you go to more, there should be a Q&A button, and type your questions in there. That's how we will be sharing those questions to the speakers. So without further ado, Miguel, please, can I hand the floor over to you? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. Actually, also for the introduction of the organization ADPC. I think that this webinar is very important, especially nowadays that we are entering in the area of doing more with less due to several changes that we have. So let me just, okay. So let me start with the title of my presentation. The title is From Reactive to Anticipatory, and then the economic imperative of the data-driven disaster risk reduction. So as you know, as we know, we are living in the area of austerity in case of the humanitarian relief. We are currently operating under strict conditions. So in one hand, we have the imminent threat, which is exacerbated by the climate change, which increases the frequency and the magnitude of weather events. The person living in Southeast Asia, we are first witness of the impact of the disasters that it has been increasing the number in the coming years. So they push a big pressure on the early warning systems and the approach that we are working to recording and anticipatory actions. But also we are entering the reality, and we are living also in the area where the global humanitarian funding has been dramatically reduced. So which exacerbates the need to do more with less. So how we increase the impact with less funding. So that is the important challenge that we have nowadays. So one of the stuff that we are doing inside of the Asian ADPC is one of the ways changing the paradigm that we have. So far, we were living in the traditional world where we just reacted to the disasters, and then based on the disaster, we enable resources and we enable human and financial resources to be able to recover. So that's why we are losing time, and then we are losing human life and also economical damage that could be warning, that could be use more efficiency. We are using anticipatory approach. So the new approach is on relying on information as an insight, when all this information enables to incorporate information and the recommendation that will be tailored for particular community to be able to react on time. So we know that a warning increases and it improves the efficiency in case of the response, and then with information is the key to this approach. So I think, okay, you have been discussing a bit about ADPC. I will go very quick about our organization. We are working 40 years in cooperation and implementation in risk reduction and building climate resilience. So our approach covers three core initiatives: enhancing the capabilities of countries by utilizing citizen science-based information, strengthening the government system for effective risk management at all levels, and improving the grounding application for disaster climate risk reduction. So under the Sendai framework, we work in multiple areas. We provided information from geospatial and climate data for decision support for decision makers. We advise policies for the DRR mainstreaming. And also we are enhancing the disaster through simulator and early warning systems that we adopted for local and regional local authorities. And then we support the national resilience strategy as the way that we connect all the stakeholders for the disaster and response. We work in 15 priorities that is encapsulated into 3 core areas: risk, governance, and finance, climate, environmental, and action, and inclusive resilience. And one of the ways that we are going with the project that we are working is to incorporate geospatial data into actionable insights, so that when we maximize the information to be able to provide early response. So this is how geospatial data plays an important role. Something that we have seen or we have faced in the region is the data is the key component and the key gap that we have for early warning systems and implementation for multiple levels. So with air observation data, this one enables more insightful actions for different users. So this is the core intelligent framework that in one side we have air observation data, which is globally free, available, and open to and transparent and also we have the second layer, that is the processing, is how we are able to analyze big information. And this is how we are using tools like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and LLMs to be able to analyze and to understand the data. And in the third is the output, how we're able to use this information for tailor-made application that will target local communities. So the way that we are doing is to incorporate the new technologies, is to incorporate the decision support systems for to analyze geospatial analytics for big data, but also we combine it with a physical-based modeling that we're able to recreate simulation, for example, for flood and droughts. And also we incorporated machine learning to be able to analyze and process information that is derived from air observation products. So inside of ADPC, we work in multiple areas. We provided climate surveillance, such as we are providing information about extreme weather events, flood, like with his forecast, and also flood mapping, drought, and urban heat. But also providing information not just for climate, but also for anthropogenic surveillance. That is the case of analyzing deforestation patterns, air pollution, and also analyzing urbanization trends, for example, for socioeconomical data. And under the Servir Southeast Asia project, that was a former project from the USAID, we developed a multiple decision support systems working operationally for the Southeast Asia. For example, for extreme weather events, we analyze extreme weather events using a pattern recognition approach, but also we using artificial intelligence, for example, for flood mapping, and also for physical-based system for flash flood detect, flash flood forecasts. And also for a drought, we are incorporated a system that will be an impact-based drought forecast. Those systems, we work together with regional organizations to be able to encapsulate into the decision-making process. Also related to anthropogenic, also we developed system that we provided a land cover monitoring system, and also forest disturbance, and also mangroves monitoring. And last one, this is the system that we use air observation data to track air quality for the whole Southeast Asia. So for early warning systems, we moved in several areas. First, analyzing and integrated data and modeling. This is particularly important because in that part, we see how data gap limit our capability to incorporate or to implement early warning systems. And then we are harnessing geospatial information to be able to fill this gap for operational products. And also we work in risk communication. We work together with regional organizations to provide tailor-made applications, for example, for effective communications. In case of disasters, also in case of the early warning system, we provided tailor-made geospatial solutions for flood and drought. And also we incorporated flash flood and landslide that is incorporated into our portfolio. And lastly, we work together with communities to have engagement in case of we develop systems that reach directly into the community, for example, for air quality, and also we work together with rangers in case of the forest degradation maps. One aspect is how to incorporate information and geospatial information more effectively. So when this is taken from the WMO, that is related how current early warning systems are not able to effective save life. So it says that it's not longer enough to provide a good weather forecast or warning. People now are demanding information about that, what to do to ensure safety and protect their property. That shows that this is an area that by providing a warning, we will not create enough value for people to react. We need to incorporate elements that provide tailor-made recommendations for people. So that will be more effective, and that will be that will provide most cost-effective solutions. So one way to do it is using artificial intelligence to reach the last mile. When we are working with communities, normally when early warning systems is quite complicated, and then they're not able to analyze and to understand what is the real meaning of the information. For example, if you provided a flood map, they don't understand what is the thresholds or levels. Artificial intelligence has been a good enabler for tailor-made communications. So we are able to analyze trends, and with this information, the system, we can tailor, for example, for personalized messages. In case of the early warning system, for example, we can add recommendations where to go, how far the flood is, what are the key recommendations that they have to carry. And those information will be personalized, and then will be tailored for specific users. So those are some examples that we have, for example, in Vietnam, where we develop an impact-based multi-hazard system, and then we provided a tailored recommendation for flood and drought. And also we are using foundational models that we are tailored to be able to improve the efficiency of the modeling. Also, one thing is to work together with the community. We know that, in case the lack of funding will this is the first layer that we have to cut, is, like the funding is the one that will take more time, but a community will help us to tailor and to understand better what is the real impact of our tools, or the impact of the system that we have developed. So that's why it's very important when we are working together in implementing early warning systems, is to develop together with the community, and also to have their feedbacks to be able to add more elements based on their needs. So that's why it's good in case of filtering. For example, we can harness information that they really need to take actions, and then we can use more personalized messages for this particular community or regional organization. So one key strategy takeaways that we have on doing more with less is how we are able to maximize the impact with geospatial information. One particular aspect is changing the paradigm from being reactive to be proactive. Rely on the information and then release the information based on our knowledge. And also, one action is actionable insight over descriptive forecast. That is the way that we wanted to incorporate elements, not just will be not just for scientific people, but also to understand how people interact and react with this information. So that's why it's what to do instead of how the system is, but what to do. What is the recommendation that you should provide? The third is efficiency through digital transformation. Right now, artificial intelligence and machine learning system have been revolutionary in our field. Help us to maximize the analysis that we have to do, and also improve the capabilities of our systems to be more resilient in case, for example, if there is some data that is needed to be covered, or there's some information that we will not have. So artificial intelligence help us to improve our capability to keep operating, for example, in these circumstances, and also help us ourselves, for example, to develop systems that will be more reliable. And also the last point is prioritizing preventive resilient financing. Is the way that we are evaluated based on the minimum cost and the maximum impact. So is to incorporate in each step which information will create the maximum impact. So that will be like we need to optimize what is the key indicator that maximizes with the impact with the less resources. So that will be efficiency, for example, in case of early warning systems, and also monitoring that help us to identify what are the variables that need to be optimized.
Miguel, sorry, can you wrap up, please?
Yes, so actually this is my last slide. So that's all for my end. So thank you so much. And
Great, thanks very much, Miguel. I'll just go straight into to introduce Vincent, if you would like to take the floor with your presentation, and please keep to 15 minutes so we've got time for discussion at the end. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Kessler. I am based in Singapore. I'm working for a company called Synspective, a SaaS satellite manufacturer that's headquartered out of Japan. Right, I'm the CEO of the team, and we have a team of about 8 people in Singapore looking after the Asia Pacific region. I think today, firstly, thanks to RSIS for inviting me, for giving me this opportunity to speak about the view from space and how space can help in this current climate and geopolitical situation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the space tech and how it has enabled much more cost-effective HADR efforts, and also the importance of the human intelligence, right? The continued importance of that despite all the improvement in technology. So a little bit of background from our understanding, Asia Pacific, where we are located, is unfortunately one of the most disaster-prone regions of the world. The country of which our company is headquartered, Japan, bears the brunt of many disasters such as flooding and typhoons and earthquakes. Right, in the year 2023 alone, in Asia Pacific, we have more than 79 major flooding incidents all over the Asia Pacific region, costing about $65 billion in losses, and over 91% being uninsured. There exists a very large opportunity for companies to work together and communities to work together to make sure that we serve these people in those regions. Quite a large number of deaths. I think statistics in 2022, there were about more than 7,500 deaths, affecting 64 million people who were displaced by this. This is the background of where we are, how we have been situated in this Asia Pacific region. But unfortunately, as what Alistair and the earlier presenters have mentioned, this is also the age of austerity. Despite the growing environmental changes and situations that's taking place for climate, the humanitarian sector is being squeezed right now, right? And people are expected to do less with less, as what Alistair mentioned earlier in the past. So I think organizations therefore have to have a difficult trade-off between doing what they're doing and also maintain the operations. And that's where I think the space sector can play a very big role, right? As some of you may know, the space sector has boomed in the past 10 years. From traditionally, space programs have been very large national programs costing 500 to 600 million USDs or euros. Launching about 2 to 3 satellites a country a year was a very impressive thing, right? The space sector has sort of democratized over the past 10 years. As you can see, in 2017, there was a large growth in the number of satellites that were launched from the space sector, not only from countries, but also from a private company that I used to work for. It's called Planet. They launched a large flock of data satellites observing the Earth on a daily basis. This enabled people to do a lot of observation at a scale that was never before possible. What made this possible? What made the large growth in a number of Earth observation satellites possible was actually growth in the associated industry called the launch industry. SpaceX and Rocket Labs, they were companies that enabled very rapid relaunching of the satellites into space, also enabled very cost-effective launches for any company that wants to launch a satellite into space. This took the monopoly away from national governments into the hands of the private companies. Electronics got miniaturized, I think we all know. And also in the past few years, before 2025, venture capitals, and there's a lot of investments coming into the new space sector. This also enabled the use of new technologies and testing of new technologies, test bedding of new ideas to go into space. So we saw a big boom over the past 10 years. Of course, what are the effects of all these space companies coming into space was that we were able to provide very rapid revisit from once every 14 to 17 days. Now we are able to see anywhere within half an hour or less for location, and this is going to get more and more. Given a situation that happens within the next 2 or 3 hours, you will get data and process information coming to your desktops. There's also a very good historical stack of data right now from space companies, right? This historical stack is very, very valuable. Why? Because in the event that where there's a disaster, you can rapidly assess and look at what has changed instead of going down to the ground, to do your monitoring that is both costly and sometimes dangerous. One of such companies is actually Synspective, where I work for, right? Just one small page on who we are. Synspective, a Japanese startup that was launched out of the Japanese government's national R&D program. We are building a total of 30 or more satellites that will enable us to collect data all over the world within 15 minutes anywhere on Earth. This is a very interesting satellite. It's a bit different from what you see on Google. We are a radar satellite builder where we can penetrate through clouds and we can actually look at the information at night. Therefore, if something happens at night or where there's low light, the satellites can be caught into place to capture an image and provide the information rapidly. This satellite itself is actually a very small one. We are building it serial in a parallel production, 12 lines in Japan. And they will actually come online very much soon. We have about 7 satellites in space already over the next 1 or 2 years. In fact, tomorrow morning, we are launching another new satellite from our fleet to provide data to the Asia Pacific region. I think the small sat is a very interesting solution to a macro level problem that we have, which is a global one, right? How do we then send all this information from people like Synspective, people like Planet, or all the small set companies? The large amount of data is coming to the ground, right? I think one of the very key links is in the regional organizations. As one of the presenters mentioned earlier, there is funding difficulties for many global organizations now. I think, but luckily at the regional basis, we still have networks that are very strong. One of them is the Asia Pacific Regional Space Agency Forum. It's a Japanese-led initiative where the regional space agencies come together to share data, right, and to discuss space law and space issues over the past. This has been the historical organizations for the past 20, 30 years. The bonds are very strong there. About 20 years ago, they launched a Centennial Asia initiative, which I think NUS CRISP is a part of, a data node where national agencies will share data. They can call out to any of the data nodes to provide data into the network. Whenever there's a flood in Indonesia, for example, or a typhoon in Philippines, and there's a level that requires data, they can actually call out to Centennial Asia to share that free data to do analysis. This information sharing is actually pretty rapid. In a number of actually 24 hours or 48 hours, you get very big scale mapping for your disaster itself. This is a very strong network that is more or less voluntary and cost-free. So if any organizations who are on this call today would like to know more, I think I can refer you to the organizations who can probably work with you to provide you data when you need it, right? Also, in recent years, there's been a lot of direct relationships with space operators and the space agencies, right? For example, Synspective has got direct relationships with the regional space agencies, and we have provided directly to them the data so that they can actually resolve the disasters in their own countries. So this is a list of what we have done in the past year for free. We have actually responded to quite a bit of disaster events in the Asia Pacific region, anywhere from the Myanmar earthquake early in the year. We will show you some sample data later, to the flooding in Vietnam and Australia and Philippines throughout the year. Very interestingly, on all these events, we have received calls directly from the space agencies of those countries to observe the disasters itself, and then they will do the analysis and eventual information sharing with their local rescue agencies. I think satellites are going to play a much larger role. In the past, people had to fly to a location. One of the examples on this list on the right is the event in Nepal in January last year. I personally received a call from the head of the disaster agency of Nepal on a Friday night, about 7 or 8 p.m. Immediately on the very same night itself, at 1 or 2 a.m., we collected a SAR data image, and we look at what they say that there was a flooding and over at the highlands of Nepal. It will take 3 days to get to that location, but we were able to collect it on the very same night and pass the information, the images, and the analysis to the users on the very same night, right? This actually helped them to identify the damage, the extent, and then to know what sort of resources to bring to those locations to help the communities over at the remote areas. Another example is in Philippines, where we provided several thousand square kilometers of images to the Philippine Space Agency for Tropical Cyclone Wilma at the end of last year. I think a number of occasions, this was one of them. We collected large tracts of areas to quickly identify which areas were flooded because of the cyclone. Usually agencies like to do their own analysis, but I think we also supplied them with a very rapid mapping solution. Within 15 minutes of getting a satellite image, we were able to quickly map out which were the water bodies in the satellite image itself. I think this will even be improved in the future as we bring more and more technologies such as edge computing onto the spacecraft itself. The satellite will be able to identify, even in space, which areas are flooded, and this will actually help first responders and rescuers to divert their resources as soon as possible at a cost-effective rate. Other examples, I mentioned earlier about the ability to look at the past, right? Let's look at the example on the right, the Bangkok sinkhole. Sometime last year, where there was MRT construction in Bangkok, there was a sudden collapse of a road, and I think there were some people who were trapped in the particular sinkhole. We went back in time, right? As I mentioned, space has a lot of background information and historical records from satellites. So we went back in time to look at what was the cause of the sinkhole. We were able to then identify that throughout the year there was already subsidence going on. This is a very unique technology from the SAR satellites. We were able to identify that the subsidence happened at a certain point in time. Then we brought it back to the authorities in Bangkok and in Thailand. The one on the left, we also rapidly responded to the Myanmar earthquakes. I think we were also again the first satellite company to respond to the earthquake itself, to capture images over the different parts of Myanmar and provided it to the authorities. And we provided it to UN Spider network. I think some of you who are on the network might have received that data from us as well. So here is the space advantage, right? I think space can do very proactive monitoring. We can command the satellite to collect data actively over a period of time throughout all sorts of weather conditions. The response is also very rapid. Right now, we are at about a few hours. I think soon we will get to 15 minutes or less with our constellation of 30 satellites being built. And where most systems are offline and where there's impossibility of getting to the place, satellites will be able to bring you the information. And also this data is actionable because this data is digital. We are able to create AI models to sort of to sort of analyze what is going on in a location to bring the information to the responders and rescuers on the ground cost effectively and rapidly. That's the advantage of space. However, I would think that we cannot be the only solution given the what do you call it, the space data and the AI models that we have. I think what is very important is that human intelligence continues to be very, very much needed in the entire process of HADR. Most importantly, I think in terms of diverting the correct resources to the correct locations cannot be made by an AI model. We need to work with partners like the ADPC on the ground and the Changi HADR centers, and also organizations in the respective countries to sort of understand the local nuances and bring that resources for individual countries to the correct places. That's why human professionals are more and more important, even though there's an age of AI, right? So what is the conclusion from me? I think we have a symbiotic future between the confluence of space technology, human intelligence, and the AI in this particular stage of geopolitical environment. We need to collaborate, doing more. I think we want to do more with less, but this can only be possible where these three tracks and technologies come together in this modern era. Okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Great. Thanks very much, Vincent, for your intervention. May I now please ask Feye for hers? Please limit it to 15 minutes, and then we will start the discussion and Q&A. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, first of all, to RSIS for the opportunity to join this discussion. Again, my name is Feye Andal, and I'm representing the UP Resilience Institute from the University of the Philippines and also the Youth Mappers community here. And today, I will be sharing some perspectives from the ground on how youth communities and also open data initiatives and how it contribute to humanitarian action, particularly in a time when organizations are being asked to do more with less while navigating rapid digital transformation and also the growing use of AI-enabled technologies. So to start, as we all know, the humanitarian sector is currently facing a very difficult and evolving reality. In fact, disasters are becoming more frequent and complex because of climate change, urbanizations, and increasing exposure of the communities. And at the same time, the humanitarian systems are also operating under significant financial constraints with funding gaps that limit the scale and sustainability of response efforts. So this creates growing pressure on organizations and including the academe to maintain impact while operating under resource constraints in each organization. And because of that, innovation must be approached carefully, especially when it affects vulnerable population. And now digital technologies are now deeply embedded in various humanitarian operations, including us in the academe, where we develop multiple digital platforms that could support communities. And as mentioned by our previous speaker, satellite datasets, geospatial analytics, and digital platforms allow the responders and also various humanitarian organizations to quickly analyze disasters and also for coordinating response. And aside from that, AI-enabled systems also are being used by different organizations to be able to process large volumes of data sets and also to be able to identify patterns while also supporting decision making in the government and in different organizations. But it's also important to note that this AI or systems could introduce new risks, particularly when automated systems influence decision makings in high stakes humanitarian contexts. But also, when used responsibly, digital technologies can also extend or expand humanitarian capacity. So, for example, satellite datasets would allow rapid monitoring of extreme weather events, including storms and also its impact like floods. And geospatial analytics, for example, could also help us identify population that could be exposed to different types of hazards. And AI-assisted processing also enable us to create faster interpretation of large datasets or big datasets during emergencies. So these types of capabilities are valuable in resource-constrained environments where humanitarian actors must operate efficiently. And one important way to address resource constraints is through community mapping and open data initiatives. As mentioned earlier by Dr. Ali, OpenStreetMap or open data would allow multiple actors like the governments, the NGOs, the researchers, and the academe, and also the local communities, excuse me, to contribute and access this kind of information. And platforms like the OpenStreetMap would allow volunteers and also organizations to collaboratively produce and consume also geographic data in humanitarian responses. And this type of crowdsourced mapping has also supported disaster operations worldwide by generating critical baseline data such as road networks, building footprints, land use, and even multiple types of infrastructure. So in a sense, open data enables a distributed model of innovation where many contributors strengthen humanitarian information systems. And community mapping builds an open data by involving the local volunteers from communities and even other organizations that are interested in contributing to the map data. So first example is that volunteers contribute data through crowdsourced mapping initiatives or activities that would help fill the gaps in existing data sets. And also, local communities bring contextual or local knowledge about, excuse me, their environment, such as, for example, the waterways or access routes, or even the informal settlements that may not appear in official information or maps. And finally, this information could also help decision support tools like risk analysis that could help communities prepare for these types of disasters and to better understand the vulnerabilities and the potential impacts of these types of events. So through community mapping, local actors or the people become active participants in disaster resilience. And my main highlight for this discussion is the youth, because the youth communities play an active role in this ecosystem. So through initiatives such as Youth Mappers and also OpenSeatMap Philippines, students and young professionals or volunteers learn geospatial technologies and also contribute to different open mapping efforts. And these types of community support also disaster preparedness through mapping, through data validation, and also through community engagement. So in this sense, youth networks function as a distributed humanitarian capacity that allow us to expand the institution's ability to respond to crises even when resources are very limited. So in the case of the Philippines, of course, youth volunteers work with various institutions and also local communities to support the disaster risk reduction initiatives. So first, youth mapping communities contribute to mapping the vulnerable and disaster-prone areas, including efforts that support responses in context, such as the Turkey and Syria, and also in Myanmar and Thailand, where rapid mapping of affected communities is important. Second, these mapping activities also support hazard and exposure analysis. So in this example, this is the NOAA website produced by the UPRI Resilience Institute, which would allow people to know which buildings or communities are exposed to different types of hazards. So in a way, these contributed data from volunteers are being used by organizations or even governments to enable their decision support tools. And lastly, these initiatives also contribute to the capacity building, where students and volunteers are being trained in different geospatial tools and mapping so that they could strengthen the long-term local resilience in the community. So these types of collaborations demonstrate how community participation, open technologies, and academic institutions can work together to strengthen the disaster resilience. However, since we know that there's an increasing use of data-intensive technologies, we also should take note that it also requires caution, since since AI systems may introduce bias and uncertainties, especially when they are trained on incomplete or incorrect data sets. So large scale, for example, data collection can also raise concerns about privacy, consent, and even accountability. So if they are not carefully governed, these types of tools may unintentionally shape risk perception and also decision making in ways that could affect the vulnerable communities. That's why the technological innovation must be accompanied by a strong ethical and governance frameworks. So to be able to mitigate this type of risk, there should be the local participation should be ensured that technology support rather than replace the local expertise. And secondly, open and transparent systems would promote accountability and collaboration among the groups. And finally, human-centered AI, where the tools assist decision makers while maintaining humanitarian oversight, are important in mitigating these risks. So these principles help ensure that digital transformation strengthen the humanitarian response rather than introducing new vulnerabilities. So before I end my presentation, I would like to say that doing more with less should not simply mean relying on technology to compensate for the limited or shrinking resources, but it should encourage us to build systems where technology, communities, including the youth, should work together. And these types of initiatives like the open data, responsible AI use, and community-driven innovation still offer promising pathways that could strengthen humanitarian action in a very complex ecosystem. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Feye, and thanks to all three for beginning this conversation. I see we have 3 questions in the Q&A box at the moment, but can I encourage the participants to please enter your questions into the Q&A function. To start, though, the discussion, I think I would like to, we've touched on it briefly with both Feye and Vincent here about the challenges and the human in the loop. So I think this is something that we should perhaps dig into a bit more. So I'd like to hear from the panelists and whoever would like to go first, really about some of those challenges that we're really facing, because ultimately information is power that we're seeing. So what are some of those challenges that we've seen? Because Feye mentioned about the bias through incomplete data sets. We're also seeing large-scale data collection globally, and what can often be referred to as over-information, that there's too much data that's being collected because of all the ethical considerations that Feye has mentioned. So I'm just wondering for Vincent, perhaps from the private sector perspective, can you talk a little bit about ESG or your corporate social responsibility in that space as well? What do you see as being the role of the private sector to perhaps ensure some of these standards of ethics are upheld and making sure we reach those most vulnerable? For first to Vincent, and then I'll come back to.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Dr. Alistair. I think for us as a private company, we were interestingly formed. We originally for the response to disasters in Japan, right? So our company mission is actually to contribute to disaster rescue efforts for the humanity. Eventually, we then pivoted towards building systems for sustainability, national security, and so on and so forth. But we have remained true to the core mission of disaster rescue. Today, we are working with the regional space agencies, as I mentioned earlier, to provide data whenever they need for disasters. So far, he has all been on the goodwill basis to help them to look at how they can better work with their communities. I think one of the challenges that I have come across in the Asia Pacific region is that there's still a very much lack of information on how to use satellite data, right? Many times beyond the national space agencies, even the responder agencies on the ground in the communities itself, they do not understand how to analyze the data on their own. Training has to be provided for them beforehand if they want to use satellite data meaningfully. That's one of the challenges that we have found. And we are now working with some agencies in respective countries to provide training to the first responders for them to use the data. In terms of ethics itself, I think space data, we conflict aside, right? But for humanitarian assistance, we are happy to help. Most space companies will actively contribute towards disaster rescue operations when asked. So I think over the past 20 years in this industry, I don't think I have seen any company reject humanitarian effort before. So we will continue to work hard to help people in this particular aspect. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And Feye, you focused in the last part of your presentation on youth mappers. So I'm just wondering if you could share with us perhaps some of the challenges that you face with perhaps the community itself. What are perhaps some of those hidden issues that we might not have yet discussed about it? Because you mentioned how active it's been and how it's largely positive experience, right? So I'm just wondering if you could perhaps flip that around and identify some of those challenges and how we might start to address some of those in terms of the community engagement.
Mhm. Yeah. In the youth mappers and even in the overall OpenSeatMap community, one of the challenges that we encounter is the sustainability or the active engagement even of volunteers. For example, in youth mappers, since we are university level or university based students, so of course students graduate, so we have to basically train the newcomers in the community. And then if they already graduate, we have to look for another set of volunteers that could help us in our daily operations. It goes the same in the OpenSeatMap community and even in the Humanitarian OpenSeatMap team, wherein not all volunteers operate or have the same capacity as others. So it's a challenge that has been going on for many years. So we just try our best to offer some token of appreciation or some modes of gifts that can be distributed to the volunteers so that they could be contributing more in this space. But yeah, that's one of the challenges in the community side.
Can I just follow up on that, please, Feye,
Mhm.
to say, do you then see this as a broader shift, perhaps back to more charity
Mhm.
focus for the humanitarian sector? Because like we've seen since the 90s, the professionalization and essentially the of the sector. Are you seeing, like, do you think that there is this shift back because there's no money? We're now going to be more reliant on volunteers and gifting and informal contributions to try and keep them active.
Well, I think it's also we try to engage those who are more interested or passionate in terms of contributing to the communities, because as we, for example, on board volunteers in this type of advocacy, we try to communicate what their contributions would look like in a global or more bigger picture, because I think that's what some of the volunteers would look into if they contribute more into this type of effort.
Okay, great, thanks. Miguel, for you, one of the questions I've many, but one is really about how we're dealing with the proliferation of information sharing platforms. Like you mentioned that you've got a particular one that you're using, but how are they all talking to each other, or are we just seeing more and more silos emerge just in the information space now? Or is all the information actually starting to work together in some positive way? And then to follow on from that, you talked about the tailoring of individual level recommendations. So I'm just wondering if with this, how, and you talked largely about climate and disaster data. I'm just wondering if we've got pre-existing social tensions or internal conflicts. How do we, or how is that being perhaps tracked? Are you looking at that at all? Or if we think about Myanmar, or we look at other countries which have internal conflicts or civil wars, how are we going to deal with that as it overlays with some of these climate and disaster challenges?
Yes, actually, it's a good question. Related to the platforms that you see that there is a overwhelming number of platforms available that normally overlaps with information each other. So sometimes like this is based kind of a project based, so they need to work in a silos. So, and also this, one of the disadvantages of several platforms is like they have an expiration date. So some of them, like they have some data that is available, but the other one is not up to date. So we are in the world of information, but we don't know the real meaning or what will be the end user. So also when you wanted to reach, for example, communities in danger, that like from Myanmar or other areas, for example, vulnerable people, we know that those platforms might not be the good tool to reach them out. We know that they don't have, for example, some indigenous communities, for example, in the north of Thailand, they don't have even electricity, even though they don't have the internet to be able to connect. So we need to find alternative ways to reach them with information. So that's why, for example, we are also using other channels to communicate, for example, social media, and also use chatbot, for example, to be able to communicate more meaningful with them so we can reach them better.
But with the indigenous communities, if they haven't got internet access, then how are they going to use a chatbot or social media?
There is also one stuff, because when you see them, kind of when we work with them, they don't have internet, but they have, for example, a local SMS, for example, like they can reach like with mobile data, and then they can share like not the full picture, but they can understand, for example, like local media, and then they can share their own, like they have their own channels. So that's why the type of communication is critical, because with SMS you need to provide the critical recommendation for them to understand and then to react. So that is the way that we are trying to reach them out.
Great, thank you. I'm just seeing now we've got a few questions, so I'm going to just skip over to them and run through them. The first question, they say it's small, but is artificial intelligence currently functioning as a force multiplier, or is it just adding another layer of complexity for us who work in humanitarian affairs? Who would like to perhaps tackle that?
Maybe I will try it, and then
Sure.
I think that maybe can complement later. Yes, actually, this is also one factor that some of the cases will increase more complexity. So I recently joined one workshop that they were saying like the first layer will be the common sense. Normally, we always try to tackle every problem with the most complex solution. But after you reach all the complex solution, you realize that the most simple solution will be the most suitable one. So when you are trying, and also this works in the humanitarian level, that normally we work under pressure, that is time, resources, and also human capabilities. And most of the time, like the most logic solution is the most appropriate one. So I think that information will be a complementary, but not will be the only solution that you need to work with.
Great, thanks. Feye or Vincent, do you have any insights on this one?
I think for me, because of the large amount of data that's available in space, AI is actually a multiplier, because in the past, the analysts will be using traditional tools to measure whatever flood areas or disaster areas manually. But I think AI has come to a point whereby it's starting. It's not at the end point yet, but it's starting to help to reduce the work for analysts, and also to increase the speed at which we can respond to disasters. Right.
Thanks. Interesting. Feye?
Yeah, for in the OpenStreetMap or in the open mapping community, AI can be both, because right now it's a conditional force multiplier. So I'll just give an example. So for example, in Rapid, where building detection are provided with a community, so therefore they can significantly accelerate mapping, especially in rural areas where features are easier to identify. So they are very valuable to us. But in more complex environments like urban areas, we often see misclassification or merged geometries and inconsistent outputs, which also require human validation. So in this case, AI could just add another layer of complexity rather than reduced workload for the volunteers or for the mapping community.
Hmm. Interesting. Actually, can I just return to the question I raised before? And I'm wondering how you deal with it, perhaps in the Philippines, with pre-existing social tensions and vulnerabilities, perhaps where there's conflict going on in different parts of the Philippines. I'm wondering, how do you factor that into your mapping, or how do you deal with some of those challenges for the vulnerable communities?
Yeah, for vulnerable communities, we usually consult the local communities first before we map the area, because we also follow certain ethical standards in terms of mapping, especially for the youth mappers, since we also are in the academic space, but we respect what the communities want, especially if the data that we will be mapping will be in the public space. So it's important to have that informed consent first before mapping them in OpenSeatMap.
Great, thank you. We've got a question here, and I think it's specifically for Vincent. But thinking about austerity, how do private sector organizations like yours balance maintaining operations and providing resources for free during disasters? And I might add to that, or are we thinking about this in perhaps the wrong way, that we shouldn't be actually thinking about it as free services and relying on charity from private sector? We should be perhaps engaging them in a different way.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the question. I think it's a great question. We are, after all, companies that are for profit, where we're not charities. But I think we are looking at the greater goal of getting the countries to become more space enabled. Right? There's a much bigger opportunity in getting countries to become space enabled than to have them pay us for disaster rescue. I think there's a understanding among most space companies that disasters itself cannot be making money, but there is a market for us in areas such as reinsurance, right? We are working, some of the companies that in insurance and in risk management are actually working with the space companies like us. One of our biggest investors is Tokyo Marine, where they're looking at insuring communities in Japan from typhoons and other weather scenarios. So in terms of humanitarian assistance, we are not likely to need to make a profit or even make revenue from that. But for weather-related scenarios, that is where the key to helping companies like us continue provide assistance to international disasters from that. Yeah.
Okay, and I'll just open it up to Phil, Miguel. I don't know if you have any of your own perspectives on the role of the private sector here, and what kind of relationship the humanitarian space should be having with the private sector, particularly around the use of geospatial data. Or if you've got any particular models that you'd want to share that you think is perhaps something we should be looking to scale up. Miguel?
Yes, actually, when the synergy with the private sector, such as like synergies, is critical, especially in the disasters. Normally, when disaster happens, there is a disaster charter, sorry, that they release data, for example, from commercial sources that we can further process, for example, to analyze hotspots. So this synergy is very important, like to see how private sector and human sectors work together in case of disaster to provide analysis, but also to provide like forecast recommendations, and also how to reach people in need during these scenarios. Because most of the time, the major concern is time. And then, yes, this synergy is very critical.
Great, thank you. Feye, do you have any insights on how you work with the private sector, or how we can perhaps reimagine this issue over around balancing operations and providing resources for free?
Yes, we've worked with some private organizations in the past, and I think they also play a critical role in scaling these types of initiatives, especially with the local communities. But I think I have to note that the impact also depend on how they would align on open data initiatives. So there are also certain limitations on what we could collect on or what we could not collect from the ground, for example. But also aside from that, the private organizations or sectors could also contribute by providing us with a network of experts also in terms of AI, LLMs, and that those kinds of digital innovations. As and of course, the access to different funding initiatives across the world.
Great, thank you. Miguel, I think this question might be for you. It's about the human-created disasters for deforestation, and how do these satellites compare to NASA MODIS and VIRUS data to identify hotspots? You mentioned hotspots before, that's why I think it's for you. High-resolution satellites like PlanetScope are used to verify if fires occur within certain concessions. So I'm just wondering, do you have any views on the different types of satellite image? I guess that's what we're talking about here. That's being collected. Are some better than others, or is there like a general standardization of what we can get now? And I presume I can attach to that cost, right? Like the clearer the image, the more it's going to cost you. I think we know that much from satellite images. And yeah, perhaps you'd like to have a go at answering that.
Yeah, exactly. I think if I understand, the question is related to how the open source information will be comparable with the commercial sources. So, for example, like they mentioned two MODIS and VIRS that they you are able to analyze, for example, trends that will be creating some index for deforestation. So the key is about the resolution and the frequency. Normally, this type of information, yes, is good. For example, you wanted to work at a regional level, but if you want to go like very detailed, for example, you wanted to analyze trends like a very high resolution, I think, yes, tools like Planet or like Synetric will be like very valuable. So, but yes, in general is the scale, and the scale determines which one is more suitable for you.
Great, thank you. And just adding on to that, the issue of cost, because the cost increases the higher quality of the image, right? So we're seeing some divergence here over what images are actually useful. Like we might see more and more satellite imagery coming through, but is it at the quality that we need? And can the humanitarian community afford the high quality data that it needs?
Yes, correct. That also one critical factor is about the price, right? Like this information from NASA are open source, and actually this is quite good, for example, for if you wanted to create operational systems, but when this is like more detailed, that this is lacking about the resolution and also the scale, we need to consider like commercial software, commercial satellites that yes require like to invest money on that.
Great, thank you. Okay, let me just move down to the next question. We've got 4 more questions. We've got 15 minutes, so let's see how we go. Frameworks like OSHA's data responsibility guidelines and the IASC operational guidance establish norms for responsible data and AI use, but implementation in crisis settings often lags considerably behind the policy language. In your different operational contexts, what does responsible AI governance actually look like under pressure? And where do you see the most significant gaps between principles and practice? So you've all touched on this issue. Maybe if we go in reverse order, let's go Feye, Vincent, Miguel. Feye, please.
Yes. So in this question, it's a very good one, actually. So I think I can answer in 3 frameworks, I guess. So first is we have to clearly limit on what AI could allow for us to decide. And then there is a need for mandatory human validation. And lastly, accountability for errors that AI has been producing over time. And then the biggest gap is that I think our principles are also strong on paper, but in terms of the operations, there are still some improvements that could be done over time, especially that we don't have the luxury of time, we don't have enough resources or capacities, and even calibration to do some for this models to become more accurate. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. Vincent?
Okay, I must admit that these frameworks not, I'm not very familiar with all these frameworks, but I think in the space sector itself, there's a less question about the ethical use of and responsible use of space data, because I think many of the Asia Pacific satellite operators are good actors in a way. We do not impose that data blockages in terms of events. In recent times, we have seen some satellite operators from various countries start to delay provision of data from conflict areas. We do not do that as an Asian operator, so that's something that we have been playing as a role without influence from any government. That's something that we are proud to say. We, however, choose not to partake in certain areas such as where it involves privacy. I think we are very concerned with privacy issues as a company. So I think that's one area that we will be very careful with. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks. Miguel?
Yes, maybe I can add that one important gap that we have seen is to keep the traceability of the information that you are using. Normally in the moment of pressure, like you can use all the information is available. However, the source is difficult to track back to the ownership. So it's difficult to have accountability of the data that you are using. So I think having the correct traceability of your data will provide you more transparent insights and also provide a more honest information.
Great, thank you. The next question is to ask each of you, if you speak to key decision makers at the national government level, what is your actual recommendation or recommendations would you suggest to make your work more effective? So maybe if you have one or two policy recommendations that you can pitch right now to those policy decision makers in our audience, what would they be? And let's start with Miguel, then Vincent, then Feye.
Okay, maybe as a scientist, I will say that it's kind of a function. We need to all maximize the impact of your decisions. Normally, when you are working, you have to say what is the minimal effort to maximize your impact. So that's why this is efficiency plays an important role, because when you are working with financial constraints and human resources constraints, so you need to do many stuff with less money. And so if one of the big recommendations that I always keep in my mind is, okay, you need to maximize the impact with the limited resources.
Thank you. Vincent?
That's a great question from the audience. Thanks for that. I think for me there was gonna be a twofold answer to that, right? The first one is I would encourage the dissemination of information down to the level of where the disaster takes place, right? If we were to keep information at a central level, sometimes there will be delays. I think one of the best examples is how we can work with the provinces and the LGUs in Philippines, all the way down to in the towns and in small villages to have the information more rapidly. I think there are people working in the Philippines to provide handheld devices or satellite devices where they can go and do what they need to do in the villages itself instead of coming down from the central or federal governments. This will rapidly speed up the response that is needed to a disaster event. And I think that's something that I would strongly recommend to do. This is not that difficult because in the age of AI, in the age of miniaturization of devices, I think we can fairly get it information down to the ground at a very rapid pace. Secondly, is a point that I have to reiterate: education. Right, space is not a easy technology to use. It is not one that right now the layman can use yet. We will get there, but I think we need to educate people all the way from the young to the farmers on the ground who have to handle the crop damage on the use of space data. Okay, and something like this will be very beneficial, and people who are geospatially educated or who are familiar with the use of technology, you will be able to play your role and your part in such HADR situations or where there's a disaster that strikes in that community. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. Feye?
Yeah, this question is very personal to me. So my first recommendation would be to treat open geospatial data in the Philippines as part of the public infrastructure, because these data sets would allow different organizations to work from a shared operational picture. And secondly, I would also recommend the national government to invest on local capacity, not just on tools or digital and innovation. Since if governments or institutions want AI and digital systems to work in practice, then they would need long-term support from different groups, including the academe, universities, youth networks, and everyone who would be able to help them validate or use these tools in real operational setting.
Great, thank you. Okay, last two questions. Let's see if we can get through them both. So the first one here is to ask your views on the do no harm principle and the importance of taking action versus being overly cautious. This includes releasing satellite imagery for humanitarian use in sensitive areas like Myanmar and the use of AI to improve communication, but also the issue of risk hallucination and conveying the wrong information. So dealing with, I guess, speed and accuracy, the balance between the two, to ensure that we can uphold the do no harm principle. Who would like to go first?
Maybe let me take a shot at it.
Okay.
Yeah, so in a way, I think that's also a very good question. It borders on ethics and the interpretation of do no harm, right? So I think it means different things to different people. What we as observer sees as do no harm is very different from what the community or what the country thinks of this particular term, and what is important to them as a community. So I think, therefore, we need to work with people on the ground. We need to work with the citizens and the responders who are actually using the information that we are providing, right? So what we basically can do is to work with partners to understand them, to build a partnership rather than a transactional or one-off data distribution with them. I think we prefer to work long-term with them to understand them better. Honestly, APR South has been around for 20, 30 years, and APR South has got a very good network in the Asia-Pacific region, understanding the nuances of the different organizations within individual countries itself. This will help to navigate the society, help to navigate what is acceptable in different cultures as well. So I guess partnership and the long-term view and collaboration will help us to understand it better. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Feye or Miguel?
Yes, actually, this is a very good question, and also I check like this is derived from like a term from medicine. One aspect that I will add is in terms of early warning systems, there is one concept is called people-centered early warning systems, which put people in the middle of any early warning actions, and this put the priority on the human life. So, and the intention needs to be the human life as a priority. So sometimes like you put more value the economical, but when you put like what is the social impact of your actions, I think this one of the critical like a fundamental principle when you are working, for example, in humanitarian actions. And also one of the stuff that you mentioned, like the importance of taking action versus being over cautious. So also this is also important when you are working with early warning systems, and also particularly it's when you wanted to predict something is going to happen, right? That you are not the magician that you are able to predict the future. So also is the way that you have to be honest with your results and to provide that the information might not be 100%, but you need to provide the information about the uncertainty of your measurements and how we are able to communicate more efficiently.
Great, thank you. Feye?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and I think it for us in the open mapping community, it really captures the tension between urgency and responsibility in the humanitarian work. So to give more example, we generally avoid sensitive or high risk data in conflict settings, such as detailed mapping that could expose the vulnerable populations or the critical infrastructure. So even when satellite imagery is available, our decision to map is not purely part of the OpenStreetMap, but we also consider ethical framework. So at the same time, we also know that there is a real need or time to act. So in disaster context, not having data is also could also cause harm. So I think the balance becomes we have to act where data clearly support humanitarian outcomes, but also we need to know when to apply restraints, especially if mapping or the AI outputs become or could increase the risk in the communities.
Great, thank you. We're down to our last question, but I'm going to fold it into your final comments as well. So the question is, regarding the need to go beyond providing data for decision making, what risks have you experienced in providing actionable or critical recommendations when communicating with last mile communities? Can you share any insights on any legal or regulatory implications of that? So I think, Vincent, you sort of touched on this. In fact, everyone has, but perhaps explicitly in those terms, last mile communities. So maybe, Vincent, if you would like to go first, and also if you've got any concluding remarks. We've got just over 2 minutes left. So thanks.
I think for now, space data is still out of touch from last mile communities. Very much so because of the lack of education and the lack of infrastructure that can get them to the hands of these last mile communities. That's a major risk. So we are working with people who can bring them into the ecosystem for the use of space data. And as I mentioned earlier, space itself is going to be democratized much more in the next few years. And using this, many communities and many people will now be able to use it for more humanitarian purposes in the coming years ahead. That's the remarks from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Feye.
From the OpenStreetMap and the Youth Mappers community side, I think one of the challenge that we have is the data completeness and even uneven coverage of data sets, especially in areas like the Philippines. So rural or those underserved communities may be still undermapped. So if decisions are made based on that data set, of course, there can be an intentional exclusion of vulnerable population, which could also raise both ethical and also operational concerns. So I think that's one of the risks that we are also trying to mitigate, especially when decision makers are using this data set.
Great, thank you. And Miguel? Yes, I think in case of the last mile, I think one important ethical aspect is how to communicate risk, in the sense like how to put value on a human life, or for example, which area we will support first. Those ethical aspect is very critical because we have to start somewhere, like we have to put some value on a human life. But in this case, it's difficult to put monetary value on a person, or to put priority in one community and not the other. So that's the aspect that is difficult to communicate and also to put priority on.
Great. Thank you for that. I think we've started a very interesting conversation on how we're seeing the development of these technologies impact the humanitarian sector. So I can imagine this is just the beginning as we try to influence the shape and direction that this space technology will have on the humanitarian sector more generally. So that just leaves me to thank our three speakers and to thank you, the audience, for joining us this afternoon for this RSIS webinar, and to wish you a good afternoon ahead. Thanks very much.